Hello everyone. So I'm just gonna film, just talk and see where this goes. I am working on my idea list. As I said, there have been so many things that I've been trying to accomplish, things that I've been successful at, things that I have disregarded, put to the side. And now that I have my time back, I skipped today's energy of the week spread, mostly because I wanted to go to the gym early. So I did that. And I usually reserve the mornings for my meditative space and then doing the energy of the week on Monday. I like them, but again, by the time that I look at the analytics, it doesn't necessarily seem that people are interacting with it or engaging with it, which is fine because right now I'm just building up the content on my pages. So it's neither here nor there. It's not something that, again, I need to keep up with every single week. I could technically do it this evening after I film this, but I just wanted to get comfortable being in different places in my house with my little filming equipment that I have, because again, for years I have just been accumulating stuff, trying to get to it, really intending and praying and meaning to get certain things accomplished, and then finally I get to a place where I'm being reminded that I have everything that I need. But I'm so accustomed to going, being stressed, worrying, etc., that I have been getting the same message for myself that I have not yet instituted, which is that I have everything I need inside of me. So with that being said, I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible because I was overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of the things that I had been materializing into my reality. And again, learning and knowing what to let go and what to keep. That's my own personal bit, which is why I said, again, when I look at the commitment that it takes to show up fully for anything, there's also that aspect of like, I still have my own work to do while I'm sitting here trying to be a support of a collective and participate in a collective. So over the weekend, I had a really wonderful weekend where I got the chance to really work with some of the essential oils that I've been meaning to work with, doing some reflexology at home, my gua sha tool, and really just getting back into the flow of doing yoga. It had been a while, I'd say, since I have had a dedicated yoga practice. And in the past few weeks of me being very intentional about what I'm doing, what I'm putting to bed, what I am waking up, etc., something that came back to me was how much my life has focused and shifted in a different way than where I was like when I was writing and publishing and promoting the book. And the best way for me to anchor that time is to say around the COVID-19 pandemic. And the more that I look at the world, I know that there are certain things that spiritual people perceived and intuited about that time. This isn't going to be one of those videos where I talk about that. What I'm focusing solely on is like the things that I was doing to show up for myself in that time, to be on track with doing what I needed to do for the book, getting it out there, being more confident in talking to bookstore owners, trying to work with them to come up with consignment agreements and things of that nature to get my books on the shelves in a way that didn't include necessarily going through the traditional channels of working with a traditional publisher, but also experiencing what it was like to pay for my own advertising, things of that nature. And one of the visuals that I saw during that time was going to a hot yoga class that my husband and I went to, that's not too far from where we live. And during that time, we have really anchored into our wellness. And again, the fracture of time where it's like before COVID and after COVID, when I look at how much has been forgotten just in the collective about the fear, the amount of people that have died, the answers and resolutions that we still haven't received, the circumventing of accountability and responsibility that's been done, where it's like so much happened so fast. And when you fast forward to 2025 and you see where we are, it's like how much of you was left in the dust, right? That you felt like was a part of who you were going to be, that was going to inform who you are now, where it's like that stuff got left in the dust. And is it worth reclaiming? For me, there were things that I have put to the side that included my wellness. And I'll give you an example. The amount of go, 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 because again, society never really stopped. You know, like the demands became greater. We were expected to do more with less. And again, just because of some of the materials that I study, just because of the clients that I've had in healthcare, geopolitics, consumer goods, I go back to psychology a lot. And so I have had this awareness that we are not going to see the true results and ramifications of that mass trauma and mass psychosis until at least 10 years from now. Now, granted, not a doctor, not a healthcare professional. This is not medical advice. This is simply my opinion. However, knowing how information works, knowing how the brain processes information, how information is stored in the body, and knowing what trauma does to the brain and the body, I feel confident saying that we still have yet to see the long-term effects of what that type of information, with that type of fear, with that type of stress has done to the human psyche and the human body, let alone people who actually had COVID, who are still dealing with long COVID, etc. When I look at some of the recent data, some issues of like brain fog, fatigue, heart issues, all sorts of cancers are now popping up in the wake of those that took the vaccine, those who didn't, etc. Again, this isn't any type of conversation regarding people's personal choices. There were some people who were coerced into taking the vaccine because they needed to be able to provide a living for themselves and their loved ones, etc. You know, to each their own. Everyone made the decisions that they made at the times that they made them, which was best for them. Again, fast forward, we are now in November 2025. We are seeing the outcomes of financial decisions that many governments, many brands, many corporations have made, that are now, and banks have made, and now humans who were not invited to participate in the spoils of those profits are now being expected to be the socialized people who carry the losses that all those companies and people have experienced since COVID. And again, that's neither here nor there, because the onus is going to be on each individual person to sink or swim. With that being said, like I said, when I go back and I look at my visions of who I was health-wise, I'm still getting myself back to where I was pre-COVID, where I was in a really good groove with my health and wellness. And again, having to push through so many different decisions where it's like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. The reason why I know it's important for me as an individual to slow down and to be able to say, these are my obligations, this is how I'm going to meet them, and I'm only going to work at this pace, etc., is because I know how the decisions made under duress can have long-standing impacts. I'll give you a perfect example. Like I said, over the weekend, I sat down and I really started putting to paper just some of the ideas that I had regarding the book, other books that I would create, the ecosystem that I would participate in, which included being very intentional about the partnerships that I would be able to maintain and cultivate with women-owned businesses, focusing on, again, we need more places to be able to go, right? A skill like writing and performing and talking and being in community, it's wonderful, right? There were certain things that came out of that time of being enclosed in your own space, where it's like you had to really decide if you were okay being alone, right? If you were okay navigating with little, or again, just all those different emotions that each and every person had to navigate through, in addition to trying to stay alive. And so to be alive in 2025, it's like anchor yourself to the fact that you are still alive. You're here. Like, that's ground base. That's where you start from. And again, for me, like putting my head down, staying above the fray, and like keeping to my commitments during that time meant that there were still some things that I was interested in that I tabled to the side, conversations that I didn't get a chance to revisit, etc. But again, just looking at how a lot of what I had been asking for since that time, and even before then, my life plan, a lot of those things have already come to be. And in order for me to properly utilize them and integrate them into the systems and the ecosystem that I'm cultivating for myself, means more hermit mode, means being very intentional about the places that I show up, the invitations that I say yes to, how much I have on my plate versus how much that I'm able to hire and delegate. And so when I look at the different streams of income and keeping track of that, that in and of itself, the cash management, the asset management, the portfolio management, the intellectual property management, the rights management, all of those things are management. That's a daily task that needs to be done, that is irrespective of the creative side of things, right? So one of the videos I filmed earlier, I showed you me creating protein waffles with the materials that I had in the house, because I did not feel like going out to the store to buy additional ingredients of things that I like, right? Because I had more than enough of the things that will make an enjoyable meal right here, present. The second video I made was me finishing one of the ideas on my idea sheet, which was make winter holiday reed diffusers, right? So I sat down and I created this list yesterday of 4 things, 4 immediate things that I would like to accomplish this week, right? Most of them take time and money. But again, as I'm journaling, as I'm revisiting and recalling just fragments of wonderful ideas that I keep meaning to bring to pass, I go back to the immediacy of the now, where there's this expectation of being on all the time. There's social media, there's TV, there's movies, there's video games, there's the external community, so being outside in the world, there's family, there's friends, there's work. We are overstimulated as a society. We have no shortage of things to get into, people to meet, foods to eat, ruckus to cause, you name it. And it takes a different type of discipline and consistency to be able to say, hey, this is my dream, I'm going to see it through. Hey, this is what I committed to, I'm going to see it through. And one of the largest signalers for me that I was being distracted and getting further and further away from my goals and ambitions was taking myself through 365 days of me writing down a weekly idea of what I wanted to get done, and then seeing what happened throughout the days of that week that either allowed me to get it done or didn't. And after a year, I'd look through that notebook, through the journal that I was using, and I hadn't gotten 80% of that stuff done. But when I look back at the busyness of the days, the things that I participate in, like nonsensical conversations, just, oh, look at this video, look at this. And this is no shade to anybody, right? Because some of those groups and those group messages and things of that nature were created to foster community and connection during a very real time and devastating time for a lot of people. But it's like, to what end, right? Some of the stuff that I'm interested in, like I said, when I look at the health statistics of Black men and their life expectancy rate, when I look at the femicide that's going on in all communities, and in particular Black communities, where a Black woman is killed, what is it, every 10 minutes by either an intimate partner or someone in her family, those sort of things are very alarming. And so again, when I tell you about like just the psychological impact of working in healthcare, working in wellness, while these devastating global crises, polycrises were taking place, it's like trying to stay sane in a unwell world was taking its toll. And so the pieces and snippets of happiness and satisfaction that I could find that I didn't have to post or promote about or girl boss about were really a saving grace for me, because it allowed me to have just a space to breathe, right? When I look at the stuff that can be accomplished in theory, with time and money, it can happen. And I've had to say no to a lot of things. I've had to sacrifice a lot of instant gratification, because the long-term goal, the long-term plans in my mind are worth the risk of like saying no to something immediate. Without getting too personal, I'll share something. Um, when I started looking at universities to attend after high school, I looked at both in state and out of state campuses because I wanted to grow into a person that could be self sufficient. When you start talking about money and scholarships, it brought into this whole merit based system of, okay, well, can she score well on these sort of tests to say where she would fall if we placed her in this program? How much funding can she get, et cetera, et cetera. But what wasn't accounted for was the overcompensation that would have to be made, because the curriculums that are taught in predominantly Black communities are different than those that are taught in Ivy League or well-to-do communities. So this idea that there are two different worlds that we're constantly navigating is very true. Like I said, I spent the majority of my formative years in the DMV. I was educated between DC Public Schools and Prince George's County Public Schools before going to a state university, a Maryland State University. And then I went to a private art school as a secondary auxiliary degree because I always loved fashion and wanted to know more about the business, wanted to know how to get things going, what is what, yada, yada, yada. So when I put all of that in a package, in addition to the fact that I've been working since I was about 15, but volunteering since I was younger, right? Always babysitting my little cousins and this and that, volunteering at church, always active, always going, going, going. When I sit down and look at how much I have contributed to society, how much knowledge and skills I have, and again, to be compared to people who may have never even had to have a job, and they'll go into the workforce as a VP because they are of a particular race, right? Or they knew somebody that knew somebody. these are some of the conditions that you're up against, right? I have had to be put in uncomfortable situations continuously to and keep my eyes on the goal of, okay, complete this degree by any means necessary, finish this class by any means necessary, do this by any means necessary, etc., etc. And I'm also told, even now when I go and talk to people about funding for the brand and this, and that, it's like I'm reminded of the odds of success for a Black woman entrepreneur and how low they are, right? I'm expected to fail, right? I'm expected to not be taken seriously by men and women, and even men and women that look like me. I'm expected to shut up and know my place. I'm supposed to just be arm candy. I'm supposed to just do what I'm told, even as an adult. And so, again, when I look at the accountability of this world and its leaders, when I look at all the grace that is extended to people who've actually killed people, right? And who are getting pardoned in so many different ways, I'm like, yes, let's actually start talking real stuff. Let's start talking about the memory keepers who were there, who were witnessing, who were writing, who were scribing, who have seen everything that's been going on and persevered in spite of, right? You start taking away all these illusions of fairness and actual law, because again, we are watching the demolition of society in America, and no one's doing anything about it. And yet, in 2026, I'm going to be expected to show up to a job, to show up to pay my taxes, and be a good citizen in spite of how I have been treated by this current administration. And I say all that to say, like, on a humanistic level, taking stock of everything that is sacrificed, right, to, again, just get a job, to make ends meet, to expect that there will always be tyranny as long as white men are in power. What quality of life is that, right? When I started researching what it would take to actually relocate business to a different country, right? When I started talking to tax consultants to just get an understanding of the type of services that they could provide, that gave me comfort in knowing that there is more. It is possible to do it. It's going to cost you a pretty penny, but it's possible. I had to say, okay, how are you going to grow, right? How are you going to show up? Do you really care that much about being an American citizen to stay and endure this type of information and this type of lived circumstance in what is supposed to be a predominantly Black area where there's upward mobility and things of that nature? And like I said, I keep track of a lot, and not in a way of like, I'm going to hold you to this, because at the end of the day, like, we're all in and out of here at a finite amount of time, right? We're all in these human meat suits until our expiration date, and then no one's going to think anything else of us. If we're lucky, our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will love us enough that they remember our names. But I can tell you, with sitting down and even just trying to conceptually visualize 16 generations back of what my ancestors looked like, I can't even do it. Not because I don't want to, but because so much of the story of humanity has been perverted that we don't know what's real or not. That's why I like going to the museums. That's why I like talking to the family record keepers. That's why I like just hearing the different stories to try to understand a timeline of something that gives me some grounding, some understanding of who I am in this place and time, right? So me defining myself, for me, all of that comes into play, where it's like, okay, yes, your name is Nicole. You were born here. This is how old you are. This is your mom. This is your dad. This is your spouse. These are your siblings. These are your grandparents. These were your great-grandparents. But it's like, okay, and then even before then, right? Oh, yes, your granddad's Bible has the family tree. Your grandma's Bible has the family tree. Okay, great. But when I talked to my grandma before she left, she also told me that back then they didn't have the thought of like how do we preserve this? Where does it come from, right? So that's why like my interest in kin keeping was so strong, right? Because it's me thinking about legacy and planning. It's like when I think about having children, it's like what are they going to inherit, right? Who who am I going to tell them about, right? If they literally are sitting here and I'm ushering them into a school, a place of education, and they have to do their family tree, do I feel comfortable enough helping them fill that out, right? That's not even talking about the health circumstances, right? That's not even talking about like the health outcomes. So when you start talking about accountability and you start talking about retribution and you start talking about reparations and things of that nature, so much has been lost and intentionally destroyed that it is absolutely abhorrent to expect people to just drop it, to expect people to just get over the years of genocidal maniacs who literally have destroyed families beyond repair, right? To talk about PTSD, to talk about trauma in the body, but then again, as we're doing this, we're literally watching the recipients of the largest bank heists. This is me speaking like, what's the word? This is me over exaggerating my terminology by saying bank heist, right? I'm just saying that the flagrant misuse and misdirection of capital to speculative markets like crypto and AI, when it's like you could be funding initiatives like roads and healthcare and things of that nature that actually help the people who are here and present who need help, rather than a speculative future that may or may not meet us all, right? But again, when you start talking about who's in charge, whose agenda are they following, whose incentive is it for them to, again, direct people's attention to those things, when it's like, name one black hospital. I'll wait. Name two black hospitals, actually, because I've done the research. Because again, when you were raised in a house of educators who literally would prefer that you further your knowledge, do a hobby, learn a skill or something like that, than be out in the streets getting into God knows what, you come up with all sorts of questions and curiosities of how to solve all sorts of things. So with that being said, the number of black hospitals and the number of black banks and the number of black public, I'll say, millionaires and billionaires, the numbers aren't adding up. And I sit here with all this knowledge, all this wisdom, all this access, all this privilege, and there's still something missing, right? I try my best to speak. I try my best to show up in different ways to say, okay, maybe they'll be interested, maybe they'll be interested, maybe they'll be interested, because we see the real outcomes, whether it's through the public health data, whether it's through the news, whether it's just driving to a low-income zip code, right? We know about redlining. We know a lot of these things are taking place, and even those who are in civil servant jobs, they're also being wiped off the map, right? We're literally seeing what's happening at the outcomes of the federal government shutdown. There's no such thing as financial stability in a lot of these communities. They're yelling at the politicians day in and day out. When you go to certain meetings, you see the real disconnect between the public communications that we receive by way of social media, all the glitz and glam marketing and sales pitches, and the lived outcomes of the people who are there in those communities day in and day out. It's a daily commitment to the struggle and liberation of a people to be in the community that I'm in, when I'm like, I know for a fact that there's better out there in a different community, right? And so for me, when I sit down and I, again, look at the list of legacy planning, of wellness, of health, and circumventing this, and how do we trying to come up with all sorts of creative ideas that can actually help the community, and reaching out to my legislators, reaching out to my local council members and saying, hey, I'm here, right? Here's my resume. I've done this work. I've done this. I've done this. I've done that. How can I help? How can I be of service? Here's an idea that I have. That's what I mean when I say like the fatigue of like the number of issues that need to be solved, the amount of time that has passed,